The morning my father handed my brother the keys to his auto shop, he looked at me and said, "You're too soft for this business, Wren. You always were." I was 26 years old. I had worked summers in that shop since I was 14, changing oil, sweeping concrete floors, learning to read a torque wrench by feel. And I was too soft. My brother Carter was 31 and had never changed a tire in his life. That was the day something shifted in me. Not broke, shifted. Like a bone that gets pushed out of place and you just kind of learn to walk different. I didn't cry until I got to my car. I sat in the parking lot of my father's shop on Route 9 in Clarksville, Tennessee, and I let myself have about 4 minutes of it. Then I wiped my face, pulled out of the lot, and started thinking, let me back up. My father built Haverford Auto from nothing. He started it in 1987 with a borrowed lift and a reputation for being the most honest mechanic in Montgomery County. By the time I was born, the second kid, the only daughter, it had 3 bays and a waiting room with a Mr. Coffee machine that was always on. By the time I was a teenager, it had 6 bays, a parts counter, and a name that people trusted. If your transmission was slipping on a Friday afternoon, you called my dad. He'd stay late. He always stayed late. I grew up in that shop. Not metaphorically. I did homework at the parts counter. I ate lunch in the break room. I knew every regular customer by name and what they drove and which ones were going to complain about the bill no matter what. My father used to joke that I had motor oil in my blood. He said it like it was a compliment. I took it as one. My mother was the soft-spoken kind of woman who organized everything and got credit for nothing. She kept the books for the shop for 22 years, and my father's name was the only one on the door. She never complained about that, at least not where I could hear. She passed when I was 22, a heart attack, fast, no warning. And after that, my father changed in ways I didn't have language for at the time. He got quieter, he got more traditional. He started talking about legacy and what it meant to pass something down. What it meant, apparently, was passing it to Carter. Carter had moved to Nashville for college, stayed for a decade, worked in sales, sold medical equipment or software or something. I could never keep it straight because it changed every few years. He was charming in that way that fills a room and doesn't leave much space for anyone else. He dressed well. He talked well. He had a wife, Melissa, who my father adored, and 2 kids who my father called his legacy in Christmas cards. I was still in Clarksville. I had an apartment on Crossland Avenue and a job at a fleet maintenance company and a savings account I was quietly building towards something I hadn't named yet. I wasn't glamorous. I wasn't a room filler. But I was there, and I showed up. And when my father needed someone to cover the shop on Thanksgiving because his manager had food poisoning, I was the one who went. Carter sent a nice text. So when my father sat us both down in the spring and said he was ready to think about retirement, I thought I knew what was coming. Not out of arrogance. I didn't walk in there expecting a parade. But I had watched that shop my whole life. I knew it. I loved it the way you love something that shaped you, even when it was hard and smelled like exhaust and made your hands rough before you were old enough to care. My father slid a folder across the table to Carter. Inside was the paperwork for a buyout arrangement. Favorable terms. Almost no money down. A payment plan built around the shop's own revenue, meaning Carter would essentially buy the business with the business's money. It was an extraordinarily generous deal. My father had also apparently already spoken to an attorney about the transfer. I sat there with my hands in my lap. I looked at my father. He looked at the table. "What about me?" I asked. I kept my voice even. I was proud of that. He said Carter had a family to support. He said Carter had a family to support. He said Carter had business experience. He said he'd always imagined passing it to his son. He said these things like they were reasonable. Like I wasn't sitting right there. Like I hadn't spent 12 years proving myself in one form or another to that shop and to him. "You'll be fine," he said. "You're resourceful. You always land on your feet." Resourceful. You always land on your feet. Resourceful. Like a stray cat. Carter had the decency to look uncomfortable for about 30 seconds. Then he started asking questions about the payment schedule, and I understood that the conversation was over. I drove home. I made dinner. I didn't call anyone because I didn't know how to explain it without it sounding like self-pity. And I refused to make it sound like self-pity, because it wasn't. It was something colder and clearer than that. It was information. It told me exactly what I was working with, exactly what to expect, and exactly what I had to do next. I started making a plan. The thing about working fleet maintenance is that you learn pretty quickly where the gaps are. You see dozens of businesses, construction companies, delivery services, landscaping outfits, all trying to manage their vehicles and equipment, and mostly doing it badly. Reactive instead of proactive, waiting for things to break instead of keeping them running, paying emergency rates when a scheduled maintenance contract would have cost them half as much. I had been thinking about starting my own mobile fleet maintenance operation for almost 2 years. Low overhead. No shop required, just a well-equipped service van and the right contracts. I'd been slow-walking it because I kept thinking about Haverford Auto. Kept thinking maybe there was still a path there. Kept leaving a door open that apparently had already been closed from the other side. Now I knew. The door was closed. Fine. I stopped looking at it. I took $8,000 from my savings and bought a used Ford Transit, a 2018, with 74,000 miles on it, and a clean service history. I spent 3 weeks outfitting it myself. Built out the shelving, mounted the equipment, organized the tools the way I wanted them. I did the state business registration, got the commercial insurance, built a simple website on a Sunday afternoon. I named it Haverford Mobile Service because that name was in my blood whether my father wanted it there or not. Then I went and got my first contract. It took some cold calling, a lot of it. I hit every construction company, every landscaping business, every small delivery operation within 30 miles. I had a rate sheet, a service menu, and a guarantee if I couldn't get to you within 4 hours of an emergency call, the service was free. I meant it. I had the bandwidth to mean it. The first contract was with a landscaping company in Ashland City, 8 vehicles, monthly maintenance plus on-call. It wasn't glamorous money, but it was steady money, and steady was what I needed. By month 3, I had 4 contracts. By month 6, I had 9. I won't make it sound easy because it wasn't. There were months where I worked 7 days and still had to move things around to cover my own bills. There were customers who tested me because I was a woman, and they wanted to see if I backed down when they pushed. I didn't. Not once. And most of them became my most loyal accounts because of it. There were late nights in the van on the side of a highway in the dark because someone's fleet truck had broken down, and that was what my guarantee meant. I honored it every time. My father heard about it through the Clarksville grapevine. It's a small enough city that things travel, and he called me about 4 months in. He said he was proud of me. He said it quickly, like he was getting something out of the way. I thanked him and kept the call short. I wasn't cruel about it. I just didn't have anything extra to give him right then. I needed everything I had for the work. Carter took over Haverford Auto in the fall. He brought in a general manager from Nashville, some guy he knew, who immediately rubbed a longtime staff the wrong way. 2 of the best mechanics quit within 3 months. Both of them had been there for over a decade. I heard this from Dale, one of the regulars, who had been getting his F1 Hembry serviced there since my father first opened the place and who called me to vent because he didn't know what else to do. "It's not the same," Dale said. "It doesn't feel like your dad's shop anymore." I didn't say anything except that I was sorry to hear it. I meant that. I wasn't glad. That shop was real to me in a way I couldn't talk myself out of. What I didn't expect was Melissa, Carter's wife, showed up at one of my job sites about 8 months after the transfer. I was doing a routine oil change and brake inspection on a delivery van in a parking lot off Riverside Drive, and I heard heels on asphalt, which is not a sound you usually hear at a job site. And I looked up from under the hood, and there she was. She said she wanted to talk about the shop. She said Carter was struggling with the business side of things. She said the GM wasn't working out and Carter didn't have the technical knowledge to evaluate what was going wrong, and the longtime customers were leaving. She said my father was heartbroken about it, but too proud to say so. Then she asked if I would consider coming on as a partner. I straightened up. I had grease on my forearms, and I was aware of that in a way I usually wasn't. I looked at her for a second. "Melissa," I said, "your husband and my father made a decision about that shop without me. They made it clearly, and they made it on purpose. I built something of my own because they did. I'm not going to hand that over now." She said she understood. She said she wasn't asking me to give anything up. She said they'd offer me equity. I told her I'd think about it. I told her I'd think about it. I did think about it. For about 2 days, while I drove my routes and filed invoices and followed up on a new contract prospect with a plumbing company out of Hopkinsville, I thought about what it would mean to walk back into that shop, what it would feel like, what it would cost me. I called Melissa back on a Thursday and told her no. I told her I wished them well. I meant the second part. What happened next, I didn't plan for. My father had a minor stroke in February. He was okay. The doctors called it a TIA, a transient thing, more of a warning than an event. But it scared him. It scared all of us. He spent a few days in the hospital and came home to a house that suddenly seemed too big and too quiet. And I drove over every day that first week because he was my father, and that wasn't something I could talk myself out of either. We sat at his kitchen table a lot that week. We drank coffee and didn't always talk. There was something in the not talking that felt more honest than anything we'd managed to say in years. One afternoon, he slid a folder across the table to me. I looked at it. I looked at him. I had my attorney draft something, he said. Before the hospital. I was going to tell you at Christmas. He paused. I should have told you a long time ago. Inside the folder was a revised estate plan. The house, a rental property he owned on Dover Road, and a cash account he built separately from the shop, all of it designated for me, not split with Carter. For me. He'd also put language in about the shop. A right of first refusal if Carter ever sold, at a price independently appraised, meaning I could never be frozen out of buying it back at market value if I wanted it. I didn't say anything for a while. The shop should have been yours, he said. I knew it when I was doing it, and I did it anyway. That's the part I'm most ashamed of. I'd waited 2 years to hear something like that. And when I finally heard it, what I felt wasn't triumph. It was something quieter, something that had more grief in it than I expected. Why Carter? I asked. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, because that's what I always pictured, a son taking over. And I kept that picture even when you were standing right in front of it showing me it was wrong. He shook his head. Your mother would have told me sooner. She knew things before I did. I thought about my mother keeping those books for 22 years. I thought about her name not being on the door. Yeah, I said. She would have. We sat there a while longer. Outside the window, his neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard, and the afternoon light was going flat and gray the way February light does in Tennessee. It wasn't a perfect moment. It wasn't a movie. He didn't ask for forgiveness out loud, and I didn't offer it out loud, and I think maybe that was okay. Because what was between us was older and more complicated than a single conversation could carry. But something moved. I felt it. By the following spring, Haverford Mobile Service had 17 fleet contracts and a second ban. I'd hired a part-time technician, a woman named, well, she goes by Rue, and she is meticulous and unflappable, and she makes me look disorganized by comparison, which I appreciate. I was making more money than I'd made in any job I'd ever held, and more importantly, I was doing it on terms I had set, with clients I'd earned, in a business that had my name on it, because I had put it there. Carter listed Haverford Auto for sale in March. He called to tell me himself, which I thought was decent of him. His voice on the phone was tired in a way I recognized, the voice of someone who has been pretending longer than they had energy for. I know it wasn't the right choice, he said. I think I knew it at the time. Then why did you take it? I asked. Not mean, just curious. He thought about it. Because Dad offered, he said finally. And I didn't know how to say no to him. I never did. That was the most honest thing my brother had ever said to me, and I understood it, in a way I hadn't expected to. My father was a man who made you want to be what he pictured, even if the picture was wrong. I exercised my right of first refusal. I hired an independent appraiser, came in at fair market value, and made Carter an offer in writing. He accepted it within 48 hours. I called my father when the paperwork was signed. He answered on the second ring, like he'd been waiting. I'm bringing it back, I told him. The shop. There was a pause. When he spoke, his voice was different, something open in it I hadn't heard in years. I know you will, he said. I should have known it all along. I stood in the parking lot of what was now my shop, the same parking lot where I'd sat in my car 2 years earlier and let myself have 4 minutes of crying, and I looked up at the sign. Haverford Auto. His name. My name. The same name. I didn't change it. Not because I'd forgiven everything or because the story had a clean ending, because it didn't. Real things don't. But because that name meant something before the hurt, and I wasn't going to let the hurt be the last word on what it meant. I went inside, found the coffee machine in the break room and turned it on. Then I got to work. I keep thinking about that parking lot on Route 9. Sitting in my car, 4 minutes of crying, then done. I didn't know it at the time, but that was probably the most important decision I ever made. Not the business registration, not the first contract, not even the paperwork on the shop. It was the decision to stop waiting for someone else to see my worth before I acted on it. There's something people don't tell you about being overlooked by someone you love. It can either hollow you out or clarify you. I think which one it does depends almost entirely on what you're made of, and whether you're honest enough with yourself to know the difference between giving up and letting go. I wasn't giving up on the shop. I was letting go of the idea that I needed my father's permission to build something real. Those aren't the same thing, even though they can feel identical in the moment. My father wasn't a villain. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. He was a man with a picture in his head, a son, a handshake, a legacy passed the old way, and he loved that picture more than he was willing to examine it. Carter wasn't a villain either. He was a guy who said yes when he should have said, "I'm not the right person for this," because saying no to his father felt impossible. People make those choices all the time. Families absorb them and carry them for years. What I know now, on the other side of all of it, is that the only thing that actually moved anything was the work, not the argument I didn't have with my father, not the explanation I never gave Carter. The work. 17 contracts, 2 vans, a technician I trust completely, a business built on a guarantee I never once broke. That's what changed the conversation. Not because it was revenge, but because it was real, and real things are harder to dismiss than feelings. I think about the kind of person it takes to do something like that, not the talent. I had skills before any of this happened. It's the other things. The honesty to look at a situation clearly instead of through the lens of what you wish it were. The judgment to know which bridges to cross and which to stop standing on. And then the plain stubbornness to keep going on the days when the work is hard and nobody is watching and there's no applause coming from anywhere. Those 3 things. The integrity to be honest, the intelligence to be strategic, and the grit to stay in it. I think that's actually all there is. Everything else is circumstance. The Mr. Coffee machine was still in the break room when I took over the shop. Same machine. My father bought it in 1994 and never replaced it because it kept working. I turned it on the first morning and stood there while it made its noise, and I thought, yeah, that's about right. Some things hold because they're built to hold. And some things fall apart because they were never built for the right person in the first place. I'm the right person. I always was. I just had to go prove it to myself before anyone else was going to believe it.